Welcome to True Tomorrows, the show where we unpack all those wild possibilities of the future. I'm Adrian Smith, and I'm glad you could join us for today's deep dive.
And I'm Julia Jones, here to help us figure out what's truly groundbreaking and what's just good old science fiction.
You know, if you're into tech or the unusual or just those stories that make you think, then this is the place to be. Each day on True Tomorrows, we're going to take a fascinating story,
Yeah.
and we're going to explore all the mind-blowing ideas it sparks. Kind of like we try to separate the future from sci-fi.
And don't forget, if you enjoyed this wild ride, make sure to rate and follow True Tomorrows for more captivating stories every single day.
Okay, let's unpack this. Today's story takes us to a world where time isn't a straight line.
No.
It's more like a tapestry you can rip, tear, and stitch back together.
Huh?
We meet the time skippers,
Oh.
Anya, Maya, and Theo, battling an entity called the Devourer. You know, just another Tuesday, right?
Yeah.
So what exactly is this Devourer, and why should we be worried?
Well, the story describes the Devourer as pure entropy unbound. Basically, chaos incarnate. It consumes the time stream, leaving behind a jumbled mess of different eras. Like, imagine Roman legionnaires clashing with a T-Rex in the middle of Renaissance Italy.
Wow.
Yeah, it's not about conquest, it's about the disintegration of history itself.
Wow, that's one wild image. So it's less about conquering the world and more about turning it into a chaotic time soup.
No.
High stakes indeed. But let's talk about our heroes, or maybe anti-heroes, the time skippers. Anya maps the threads of time.
Right.
Maya can actually warp time with her laughter.
Yeah.
Now that's a superpower I wish I had.
Yeah.
And Theo can restore objects just by touching them. They sound more like a band of misfits than your typical world-saving crew. What makes them so effective against something as powerful as the Devourer?
It's their unique abilities, of course. They can manipulate time in ways we can barely imagine. But here's where it gets interesting. Their very actions, their attempts to repair the timeline, actually draw the Devourer to them. It's like they're inadvertently ringing the dinner bell for this cosmic entity.
So they're caught in this paradox. They have to fight, even though it attracts the very thing they're trying to defeat. That sounds like a recipe for disaster.
Exactly. They're stuck in a no-win situation. They have to fight. But every battle brings the Devourer closer. The turning point comes when they realize this pattern. Instead of just reacting to the Devourer's attacks, they decide to go for the root of the problem. It's insatiable hunger for the very beginning of time.
So they're shifting from a defensive strategy to a more offensive one. Kind of like cutting off the head of the snake, so to speak.
Precisely. And their plan is pretty ingenious. They don't try to fight the Devourer head-on in the final battle. Instead, they set a trap.
Ooh, I love a good trap.
Tell me more. Well, Theo uses his power not to restore something this time, but to freeze time, creating a pocket of absolute stillness.
Hold on, he can freeze time.
Okay.
Now that's a game changer. So they create this time freeze, and then what?
Then Maya uses her temporal distractions. Remember, she can warp time with her laughter, to lure the Devourer into that frozen moment. Essentially, they force it to devour itself. It's a brilliant, if not somewhat...
Yeah, that's a good point. We're talking about manipulating time here, not just building a faster spaceship. So what's the science behind all of this?
Well, the story doesn't go into the specifics of their technology.
Right.
But we can speculate a bit, can't we? To manipulate time like that, you'd need a deep understanding of physics, particularly quantum mechanics and the nature of space-time. We'd need to understand how time functions not as a linear progression, but as a flexible fabric woven into the very structure of the universe.
Okay, so we're talking about some seriously advanced physics here. But is there any evidence that something like this could actually exist? Are there any real-world scientific theories that support the idea of time manipulation?
That's where it gets really interesting. You see, while we haven't quite figured out how to build a time machine, yet there are some tantalizing hints in theoretical physics that suggest it might not be as far-fetched as we think. For example, there's this concept called wormholes, which are theoretical tunnels that could connect different points in space-time.
Wormholes? Like those things from sci-fi movies where you can travel to different galaxies?
Exactly. Now, the existence of wormholes hasn't been proven yet, but the mathematics behind Einstein's theory of general relativity allows for their possibility. And if wormholes do exist, they could potentially be used to travel through time as well as space.
So theoretically, if we could figure out how to create and control wormholes, we might be able to step into a time machine and visit different eras. That's pretty mind-blowing.
It is, isn't it? But even if wormholes turn out to be a dead end, there are other areas of research that hint at the possibility of time manipulation. For example, some physicists believe that the very act of observing a quantum system can affect its past, a phenomenon known as retrocausality.
Wait, hold on. You're saying that just by looking at something we could potentially change its past. How is that even possible?
It's a very strange and counterintuitive idea, and it's still highly debated within the scientific community. But some experiments have shown results that seem to support the concept of retrocausality. Now, we're a long way from being able to control this phenomenon, even if it does turn out to be real. But it does raise the question, what if our understanding of time is far more malleable than we currently believe?
That's a pretty wild thought, isn't it?
Yeah.
To think that we might not be as bound by time as we think we are. But let's come back down to Earth for a moment. Even if time travel on a grand scale remains elusive, what about the technologies we're developing right now? Are there any emerging technologies that could be seen as early forms of time manipulation, even in a limited sense?
Absolutely. We're seeing some fascinating advancements in fields like virtual reality, artificial intelligence, and biotechnology that are starting to blur the lines between the past, present, and future. Take, for instance, the development of advanced virtual reality experiences. Some experts believe that these immersive environments could eventually be used to simulate past events, allowing us to virtually relive history.
That's interesting. So instead of just reading about history in a textbook,
Ah.
you could actually experience it firsthand, even if it's just a simulation. That would definitely change how we learn and understand the past.
Right. Imagine being able to walk through the streets of ancient Rome or witness the signing of the Declaration of Independence. It would be like having your own personal time machine without the risk of being devoured by an entropy monster.
That's a pretty enticing thought.
Yeah.
Well, wouldn't that also raise some ethical concerns? I mean, if you can experience historical events firsthand, even in a simulation, it becomes less like a story and more like something you've actually lived through. Could that lead to a distorted view of history, or even the manipulation of memories?
Those are really important questions. It definitely blurs the lines between past and present, and it raises all sorts of ethical questions. For example, who gets to decide which historical events are simulated, and how do we ensure that these simulations are accurate and unbiased? After all, history is often written by the victors, and virtual reality could be used to perpetuate certain narratives while silencing others.
Right? It's like the saying goes, history is written by the winners. And if those winners control the technology that shapes our perception of history, that could be a very slippery slope.
It's a bit like the debate around deepfakes, isn't it? We can create incredibly realistic videos and audio of people saying and doing things they never did. Imagine applying that technology to historical figures. We could end up with a world where no one knows what really happened in the past. It would be impossible to separate fact from fiction.
And wouldn't that make it easier to manipulate people? If you can control the narrative of the past, you can control the future. It's like giving someone the power to rewrite history to fit their own agenda.
Exactly. And that's where the real danger lies, not necessarily in the technology itself, but in how it's used and who controls it.
It's like any powerful tool, right? A hammer can build a house, or it can be used as a weapon. It all comes down to the intent of the user.
Precisely. And that's why it's so important to have these conversations now while these technologies are still in their early stages of development. We need to be thinking about the ethical implications, the potential for misuse, and the safeguards we need to put in place to ensure that these tools are used responsibly.
Okay, so we've got time travel, we've got virtual reality simulations of the past. What other tech ties into this idea of manipulating time?
Well, what about the concept of digital immortality? The idea that we could upload our consciousness into a computer and essentially live forever.
Okay, yeah, that's been a hot topic in sci-fi for decades.
Okay.
But is it really possible? I mean, are we talking about actual immortality or just a digital copy of ourselves that lives on after we're gone?
It's definitely still in the realm of speculation, but there are scientists and tech companies actively working on brain-computer interfaces and whole brain emulation. The idea is that if we can map the neural connections in the brain and replicate them in a digital environment, we could theoretically transfer our consciousness to that environment.
So instead of leaving behind a physical legacy, we'd leave behind a digital one. Our thoughts, memories, and experiences would live on in the digital realm. But would that digital version of ourselves really be us? Or just a copy, a shadow of who we were? And would that digital self be able to experience time in the same way we do now? Would it even age?
Those are huge philosophical questions, and frankly, we don't have the answers yet. But that's what makes these conversations so fascinating. We're on the cusp of technologies that could fundamentally alter our understanding of time consciousness and what it means to be human.
It's almost like we're becoming the time skippers in a way, shaping the future of time itself. But unlike the characters in our story, we don't have a map, and we don't know what dangers lie ahead.
That's true. And perhaps the most important lesson we can take away from the time skippers is that even the most well-intentioned actions can have unintended consequences. When you're dealing with something as fundamental as time, even the smallest ripple can create a tidal wave.
So what does all this mean for us here and now? What can we do to prepare for a future where time might not be as straightforward as we think it is?
I think the key is awareness. We need to be mindful of the technologies we're creating and the potential impact they could have on our lives and on future generations. We need to ask ourselves the tough questions. What are the ethical boundaries? What sacrifices are we willing to make? And most importantly, what kind of future do we want to create?
It's easy to get caught up in the excitement of new technology, but we also need to be cautious, right? We need to think about the long-term implications, not just the wow factor, but also the what-if factor.
Absolutely. We need to approach these advancements with a healthy dose of skepticism and critical thinking. We can't let the allure of progress blind us to the potential dangers. Just like the time skippers discovered, tampering with time can have unforeseen and irreversible consequences.
So are you saying we should just stop innovating, put the brakes on technological development altogether?
Not at all. Progress is essential, but we need to be responsible stewards of that progress. We need to have open and honest conversations about the ethical implications of new technologies. And we need to be willing to adjust course if necessary.
So it's not about stopping progress, but about guiding it in a direction that benefits humanity, steering the ship towards a future that we consciously choose, not one that just happens to us.
Exactly. It's about ensuring that technology serves us, not the other way around.
It's a big responsibility, but I think it's one we're ready for. After all, we're the ones shaping the future. We're the time skippers of our own reality.
And hopefully we can learn from the mistakes of our fictional counterparts and create a future where we don't have to sacrifice ourselves to save it.
Now that's something to think about. But hey, maybe that's a conversation for another episode of True Tomorrows.
I think you're right. We've given our listeners a lot to digest today.
We have. And we want to hear from you. What are your thoughts on time travel, virtual reality, digital immortality, and all the other mind-blowing possibilities we discussed today? Head over to our website or social media channels and share your reactions. We might even feature your comments on a future episode.
And remember, if you enjoyed this deep dive into the strange and fascinating world of True Tomorrows, make sure to subscribe to our podcast and leave a review. We release new episodes every day exploring the cutting edge of tech and the ethical dilemmas that come with it.
Until next time, keep those minds questioning and remember the future is what we make it.
It really is mind-boggling to think about, what happens to the concept of death if we can theoretically live forever in a digital form? What happens to our sense of self? It's almost like stepping into uncharted territory, a new frontier of human existence.
It's fascinating to think about how our relationship with time has already changed so much even without these super advanced technologies. Think about how the internet has compressed time. We can communicate with people across the world in an instant. Access information from any point in history with a few clicks. It's like the barriers of time and distance are becoming increasingly porous.
That's a great observation. We're already living in a world where time feels more fluid than ever before. And as technology continues to accelerate, that trend is only going to intensify. Which brings us back to the idea of digital immortality. Imagine a digital consciousness. Would it experience time in the same way we do? Would it be subject to the same limitations of aging and decay? Or would it exist in a kind of timeless state, unconstrained by the linear flow of time as we know it?
That's a question that philosophers and scientists will be debating for years to come. But it does make you wonder, if we could upload our consciousness into a digital realm, would we be escaping the constraints of time? Or would we simply be creating new ones?
It's a double-edged sword, isn't it? On the one hand, digital immortality could offer a kind of liberation from the limitations of our physical bodies and the inevitability of death. On the other hand, it could also lead to a new form of confinement, a digital prison of our own making. Imagine being trapped in a digital world, unable to escape even if you wanted to.
It's almost like trading one cage for another. But instead of being confined by the limitations of our physical bodies, we'd be confined by the limitations of the digital realm. It's a thought-provoking dilemma for sure.
And it highlights the importance of carefully considering the implications of these technologies before we rush headlong into them. It's not enough to just ask if we can do something.
Right.
We also need to ask if we should and what the long-term consequences might be, not just for ourselves, but for future generations.
I think that's a really important point. We often get so caught up in the excitement of new technology that we forget to ask the tough questions, the what-if questions that can help us anticipate potential pitfalls and avoid unintended consequences.
It's like we're driving a car at breakneck speed toward the future, and we're so focused on the road ahead that we forget to check the rearview mirror. We need to be mindful of where we've been, where we are now, and where we're headed. And we need to make sure we're in control of the vehicle, not the other way around.
So how do we do that? How do we ensure that technology serves humanity rather than the other way around? It feels like such a massive challenge, especially with the pace of technological development constantly accelerating.
It is a massive challenge, no doubt about it. But I think the key is to foster a culture of critical thinking, ethical awareness, and open dialogue. We need to be having these conversations not just in academic circles or tech conferences, but in our everyday lives, in our schools, in our workplaces, in our communities. We need to be talking about the potential benefits and risks of emerging technologies. And we need to be involving a diverse range of voices in these conversations, not just scientists and engineers, but also ethicists, philosophers, artists, and everyday citizens.
Thinking about it, the Time Skipper story is a great example of what can happen when a small group of people hold all the power and knowledge about a powerful technology. They were the only ones who knew how to manipulate time, and ultimately they had to make a decision that affected the entire course of history, a decision that erased them from existence. It's a cautionary tale about the importance of shared responsibility and transparency when it comes to powerful technologies.
Exactly. It's a reminder that knowledge is power and that power should be distributed wisely. It's not about suppressing innovation. It's about guiding it in a direction that benefits all of humanity. And that requires collaboration, critical thinking, and a willingness to consider perspectives beyond our own.
It's about being mindful of the fact that the future isn't predetermined. It's a canvas waiting to be painted. And we all have a role to play in shaping that canvas, not just the tech giants and the innovators, but every single one of us.
And that's an empowering thought, isn't it? The
Yeah.
future isn't something that just happens to us. It's something we actively create through our choices, our actions, and our conversations.
I like that, creating the future,
Mm-hmm.
rather than just letting it happen to us. But that also means accepting the responsibility that comes with that power, the responsibility to think critically, to act ethically, and to engage in open and honest dialogue about the technologies that are shaping our world.
And it's a responsibility we can't afford to shirk. The stakes are too high. We're talking about the very future of humanity, the future of time itself. And as the Time Skipper story so aptly demonstrates, even the smallest ripples in the fabric of time can have profound and unpredictable consequences.
So what does all this mean for us here and now? What can we do as individuals to navigate this complex and rapidly evolving technological landscape? How do we ensure that we're not just passive passengers on this journey into the future, but active participants in shaping its trajectory?
That's a great question and one that deserves a thoughtful response. But before we delve into that, why don't we take a quick break? And when we come back, we'll explore some practical steps you can take to become more informed, more engaged, and more empowered in the face of these mind-blowing technological advancements. Stay tuned.
All right, so we've covered a lot of ground today, from time-traveling misfits to the mind-bending possibilities of digital immortality.
Yeah, we have.
It's easy to get caught up in the what if and the wow factor, but as we've discussed today, the real challenge lies in navigating the so what. How do we make sense of all this? How do we ensure that these incredible technologies are used to enhance our lives, not diminish them?
I think the first step is awareness. We need to educate ourselves about these technologies, understand their potential benefits and risks, and be aware of the ethical questions they raise. We can't just blindly accept the latest gadgets and trends without considering their impact on our lives and on society as a whole.
Right. It's about being informed consumers, critical thinkers, and engaged citizens. It's about asking questions, challenging assumptions, and demanding transparency from the companies and institutions that are developing these technologies.
Absolutely. And it's not just about individual awareness. We need to be having these conversations with our friends, families, and communities. We need to be engaging in public discourse, debating the ethical implications of these technologies, and advocating for policies that promote responsible innovation.
It's kind of like the time skippers in our story, right?
Yeah.
They realized that they couldn't just keep reacting to the Devourer's attacks. They had to come together, pool their knowledge, and come up with a proactive plan. And even though their plan involved a huge sacrifice, it ultimately saved the timeline. In a way, they're a model for how we should approach these challenges with collaboration, foresight, and a willingness to make tough choices for the greater good.
That's a really insightful connection. We can learn a lot from the Time Skipper story, even though it's a fictional one. It highlights the importance of collective action, the need for ethical decision-making, and the power of sacrifice in the face of existential threats. We may not be facing a time-eating monster, but the challenges we face today, climate change, artificial intelligence, genetic engineering, are no less daunting.
And those challenges require us to step up to engage and to think critically about the kind of future we want to create. It's not about being afraid of technology. It's about using it wisely, responsibly, and with a deep understanding of its potential impact on our lives and on the world around us.
It's about recognizing that we're not just passive observers of the future. We're active participants in shaping it. And the choices we make today will have ripple effects for generations to come.
So what's the takeaway for our listeners today? What's one thing they can do to become more engaged in shaping the future of technology?
I would say start by having a conversation. Talk to someone about the topics we've discussed today. Time travel, virtual reality, digital immortality. Ask questions, share your thoughts, and listen to different perspectives. The more we talk about these issues, the more informed and engaged we'll become.
That's Queen advice. And remember, you can always join the conversation online. Share your thoughts on today's episode on our website or social media channels. We love hearing from our listeners and learning from your insights.
And don't forget to subscribe to True Tomorrows for more deep dives into the fascinating world of future tech and the thought-provoking questions it raises. We're exploring new frontiers every day, and we're excited to have you join us on this journey.
Until next time, keep those minds questioning and remember the future is closer than you think, and it's up to all of us to shape it.